Welcome to Because We Love You, a podcast dedicated to helping you live a life of wellness. My name is Stacy, and I'm here with my co-host, Jade.
Hello. This week we are talking about one of my favorites, conflict. So there's going to be tons of good information, and I hope you learn from this. If you need any of our resources, please go to the show notes.
And as always, we would love if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram. You can listen on Apple Podcast or Spotify.
I'm probably the most excited about this episode that I have been of any.
I'm sure you are. And
How do you feel about it?
I have been the most nervous. I was not excited about it all. I felt kind of like bored by it and not interested. But I feel differently. Yes, I do.
I agree. Thank you, Stacy, for not letting this be our first, our debut episode, talking about conflict.
Yes.
But I do agree that we need to talk about it because it has helped change and shape my life. And then also all this great research and things that we know that we do need to engage and see the positive of conflict.
Yeah. This is a fun one for us because we think very differently about conflict. Conflict makes me very nervous. I've really spent my life trying to avoid it. So this message is just as much for me as it is for all of you. I do not like conflict. It makes me sick. But you feel very differently about it.
And I like it. I mean, I don't want to say that I love it, but I do like a dash of conflict because it gets me a little bit excited. When I was thinking back, it kind of reminded me, and you called me out on this, but it was Valentine's Day, and we were at this Valentine's Day party, and there was some idea that was presented, and there were 3 people there, and the 2 girls, you and another one of our friends, kind of agreed to it, and I was just like, and they asked me, and initially I was just like, nope, I definitely disagree with this. But I didn't really have a lot of supporting evidence. And Stacy was like, that's not you at all. I know you. And that's not what you think at all. And I was like, oh my goodness, you called me out. And that's right. I was like, but I just didn't want to agree.
Yeah.
Why agree? Agreeing is boring, right?
Yeah. To you.
To me.
But not to everyone. But that was funny. I mean, I run away from conflict. You run straight to it and sometimes we even create it just because,
I know. So but through this, I've definitely realized that we both have things to learn from this.
Yeah.
I think one thing that people who hate conflict can learn is that we do have a negative view where I have more of a positive view, which I hope to inspire you today.
Yeah.
You have more of a negative view of conflict. And I think it just comes from the day-to-day conflict that sometimes we have.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I looked up as we were prepping for this message, the definition of conflict. And so if you look at Merriam-Webster, it says it defines conflict as battle, having an extended struggle, having a clashing disagreement. And look at how negative and really aggressive those words are when you just look up the definition of it. And so I think it will be hard to totally change our mindsets about, conflict can actually be a good thing. There's just, I think, so much negativity that surrounds it.
And I think we also just see the conflict day to day, the dreaded morning, getting our kids ready in the morning. It's like picking out the outfit. The tag is bothering me.
Yeah.
And it's like that conflict that has nothing to do. There's no benefit out of it. And we just we go through life, or the employee that is constantly complaining about the same thing. And then there's no resolution to it. And it just feels like conflict is so negative. But I think that we want to change that today. And we want to pull out the positive.
For sure.
Of conflict.
Yep.
Because basically, it's going to happen, right?
Yeah. For sure. Everywhere. We do. I mean, we do. Yeah, I do. For sure. Certainly at times with our children, like you said, the getting ready stuff, mine tends to be on the other end. The going to bed part is hard.
You just drug them for that, Stacy. Oh, sorry. Then there's no conflict. No. Please. Okay, keep going.
Yeah,
keep going. Conflict with your husband?
Conflict with my husband. The one thing I would say that we fight about the most is what we heard this somewhere many, many years ago, but I don't remember where. We call it non-time dependent tasks, in the sense that, like, when I ask him to do something for me, I want him to do it right then. And there are often things that don't need to be done right then, but I want them done right then. So things like, oh, the garbage can's full. Hey, can you take that out, to the garbage can outside, like take the bag out? And he'll be like, yeah, sure, right? And then it's 3 hours later and I'm like, so about the trash. And he's like, this is a non-time dependent task. I will take it out. I'm just not doing it right now, right? And so we have that conversation probably once a week about some random non-time dependent task.
Is there any resolution?
No, I think we'll probably fight about non-time dependent tasks forever.
See, that's why it feels so negative. I think what really inspired me just about when you think about conflict is that it's so heavily rooted in our workplace. And Psychology Today had a statistic, and it said that 85% of people will experience workplace conflict at some point. So, I mean, I feel like we have to learn how to handle it, and how do we make this kind of a better thing.
85%, that's so high.
Yeah.
So
I mean, but I guess it's what degree do people think is conflict, too. It's true. Like maybe just having a morning conversation with me and they're like, we had conflict today. And I'm like, what? That was my passionate discussion about today's activities. Like, I don't understand why this is conflict.
I bet your workplace, I wonder if the number's higher. Like, would 99% of people that work with you say they engage in conflict regularly at work?
I don't know how I feel about that question. No, I do not. I think that for the most part, I'll take a poll later, a private.
Yeah.
Won't let they're anonymous. Yeah, it would have to be anonymous. But I think, like, I love that. Like, so when we think of not having conflict, we just think of that as being peaceful and tranquility, and we're all in harmony together. But I think of it when we don't have conflict, we have apathy and we're not willing to grow.
That's right. And that's something that I really struggle with. Definitely guilty of that. Like, for me, no conflict equals peace. I just think of it that way. And a quote from this book that we've read recently by Adam Grant says this: the absence of conflict is not harmony, it's apathy. If you're in a group where people never disagree, the only way that could really happen is if people don't care enough to speak their minds. And that hit me hard, because I've always thought of conflict, no conflict equals peace, no conflict equals harmony. But in this sense, right, it's sending us this message that conflict can actually be caring.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. And I feel that, when you care so deeply about a project, something like conference that you're putting on, or a task, or a vacation, a family vacation, that honestly, some of the conflict that comes from there is because you are caring so much. But because we think of it negatively, I think if both parties can say, she's doing this, she's behaving this way because she cares so much. Right. Not to mean that we can't grow in how our presentation, which we'll talk about next week.
Yes.
Because sometimes my presentation is not the best, if you know me, but it comes from a heart of caring. I think that a lot of times we sometimes see it as conflict as being insecurity, or coming from a place of insecurity. But I think if we reposition that and say, no, I love you so much that I'm going to tell you when I'm hurt.
Yeah, that's true. And I think of times when you've said hard things to me, right? Maybe about things that I've done that have hurt you, or things that I need to work on, and same, right, with you. And I guess it feels different with you than with a stranger, but in those moments, I know it's because you love me. Yeah.
And maybe that's an important thing to note, is that true healthy conflict is best in a relationship that you truly care for one another. When you have that foundation of love and support and you know they love you, that's where true conflict can breed. And if you don't have that, like figuring out like, how do we know that you know, we're going to disagree on this that right here, but to the side, like, I will never stop loving you.
Sure. Yeah. And I think at the minimum, respect, and you know that there's a pattern of respect there when you think about like in the workplace. Well, I know at least I trust this person and respect them. I don't have to love them, but in the context of a relationship, it's even more important. And that reminds me of, you know, thinking about who we're fighting with, who we have conflict with, right? Like, we don't need to engage in conflict with a person in line at the grocery store who said something that you disagree with, because in that moment, what's that really going to do? Are you really going to grow from that interaction? But these conversations are more helpful when they're in the context of a relationship.
Exactly. So I think that one reason, and I've seen this in your life, and I want you to share too, about you generally just like to be an agreeable person. Like that's just your, you know, that's what you put out. And I think there are some people, maybe a much smaller portion, but they generally like to be more disagreeable and like to spawn and whatnot. And I found it interesting. There was actually Adam Grant. He prefaced some research that had been done with grad students, and they had developed their ideas and they had spent some time like formulating these papers and stuff that they knew they would have to defend, but they thought they were going to have to defend it against other peers or people in their class. Well, they had gotten lawyers to like negate and kind of tell them everything they need to do. And these lawyers like berated them for hours about their ideas and their views. I mean, pretty much when they debriefed these people, and they're like, it was horrendous. You know, we had to fight for everything we believed in. And it was just and many of them, like 90% of them said this was a terrible experience and it was so hard, and they shut down and they cried. But there was this portion of people that they were like, this was fun. This was fun. And they were inspired. They were like, yes, it caused me to really think. This pulled this out of me that I didn't know was there. And so that's cool, but that's such a small portion of people who really find that this is inspiring, and they love that growth process and that calling out process. But many of them are like you. So what describe to me in a sentence or illustrate like what goes on when you think about engaging in conflict?
So I would say first, I just hate how I feel. Like even the physiological reaction, how my body reacts to conflict or even disagreement, things that are not necessarily volatile, just, you know, a disagreement. I just get that pit in my stomach. My heart starts to race. I just feel bad. But the other thing that happens is I hate to make other people feel bad. And so in conflict, you know, for me, I think I just kind of go with the group or go with the other person, and will say I agree even if I don't agree, which I know isn't healthy. But I really want to avoid making other people feel the way I'm feeling in that moment.
Yeah. And this goes nicely with the research on conflict. What type of conflict is most beneficial? And Adam Grant, he talks about this, how there's two types of conflict. There's task conflict and there's relationship conflict. Task conflict is that people versus a problem conflict, and relationship is people versus people. And I think what you described is that relationship conflict that you feel even when it's about a task, but it so easily flips into this is more relationship, and you're taking this personally. But study after study that he did is people that could choose and to engage in task conflict, they were so much growth happened in the organization or the business because they kept things on the problem, not on a feeling or an emotion, or, you know, if she thinks that's the answer to the problem, she must hate me, or she must think I'm this. And that, I think that was really enlightening because I didn't know that we do that with, especially in the workplace. I think that this is a place where you can really, really see it, is keep conflict based on what's the problem.
Yeah. And I loved reading that research because it just taught me, we can do conflict well. Like we can do it, and it can be helpful, and it can lead to growth. Just that research on teams, and, when they give them a problem to work on, those who actually engage in more task conflict are more productive and more creative and more innovative. And those people who are engaging in relationship conflict are not. And so that type of conflict matters, keeping it problem focused, like you said. And then the thing that I thought was really helpful was how they found that people who engaged in that task conflict early, so when you first start a problem, talking about how we view things differently and disagreeing with each other's ideas, later in the project, when you get closer to the end and you have conflict again, you're more likely to revert back to that task-oriented conflict instead of relationship conflict. And so it becomes a pattern that you have with that team. So I really, that's one of the things that helped me view conflict in a healthier way or in a more positive way.
And I think it's really hard for, some personality types that are more people oriented, to make that jump. Because I think that potentially that task oriented conflict is easier for if you do the DISC assessments, the D's and the C's, the people who that's all that it's about. They're not really thinking about the person. But when you have that emotion and you feel so strongly the ideas behind it, and you mentioned that, because I think even last week you said that was the thing you loved about yourself but was so hard. But you're sensing the emotion of everybody in the room, and when it comes to dealing with the problem, you're like, oh, but they agree with this because they felt like this and this happened to them. And you're thinking about their backstory when it's really more just about the task.
I make everything relational. And, sometimes it's just not, or it can't be. That was a real struggle for me, for example, in the workplace, where I, in the first few years of work, never shared my opinion, just went with, whatever everyone else was saying. It really took a good leader who modeled this for me. And in situations when we were having discussions about things and maybe people were not agreeing, he would say, hey, Stacy, as a psychologist, I'd really love to hear what you have to say about this, right? And kind of that needed to be pulled out of me. And task focused. Tell me with your background what your thoughts would be on this issue, right? And in those moments, it didn't feel relational. It was clear that it was task oriented. It made me feel more comfortable sharing my opinion, like I wasn't going to step on anyone's toes or make anyone feel bad. And so, now trying to be that kind of person leader in the workplace who pulls, people who haven't said anything out of their shell.
And I feel the opposite. Sometimes when you think of everything as a task and being better, I'm like, doesn't everybody want the best result?
Right.
So often I give my opinion, my thoughts really fast, abrasively, and like bam, 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 because I'm thinking this is only a task. This has nothing to do with you. Yeah. And even in my own relationship with my husband, sometimes he'll be like, you just spouted off like 6 things that you thought that we need to change. And that seems like a lot. And he's he is taking it more of like a relationship conflict. And I'm like, no, these are just tasks. This is not, this doesn't affect the way I feel about you. Like once I get these tasks and how you can be better, let's go snuggle on the couch.
Right.
But sometimes it feels misunderstood. And I think that what this research has shown us is both ways, is maybe there are some spouters in your life, people that are really easy to say, well, you just need to change that. Well, have you thought about that? And it's not because they don't like you or they're mean or they're disagreeable altogether. It just means, I think, coming from me, that they care, that they're looking at it as a task to fix instead of like this deep-suited relational hurt. So it's really I love it. I love that now we have terminology for it, because I think we felt this, but then we can kind of depict it and we have terminology.
Talk about it. Yeah. I think it's interesting you brought up, with you and Jace and conflict and how sometimes it can come off as abrasive, because just being in lots of settings, of course, as couples and with other couples or other people, I think people do automatically interpret conflict as relational. Yeah. Right? Like, I mean, even when we're in small group or whatever, people kind of start, we know you all now. So we just kind of laugh or giggle, at the interactions that you two have. But the thought, especially when people come in for the first time, is like, whoa. Like,
are they going to get divorced tomorrow?
right?
Like do they even love each other? No,
Yeah.
it's just passionately discussing. And it's still something, I'm not saying that it's all good. I really am addressing that I have,
And I wasn't calling you out. I was just
need
saying,
to have issues. But also that other people, not look at that as just purely negative. It's like, oh, she did. I mean, like, why wait until after group and have this long, drawn out conversation about it? I just need to call you out right now and be like, oh, do you really believe that? You know, things of that nature. It made me just briefly think about even last night when we were doing the prayer on FaceTime. Yeah. And it's like, you know, it was like, all it was a prayer. We just prayed. This seems way too peaceful. Like, let's call out some conflict. And my husband called me out. He's like, Jade, we were going to pray for 10 minutes. And now you want to like talk about war and like the ideas behind Ukraine and Russia. And I'm like, oh, yes, just calm down, Jay. But this makes me think of a cool story of the Wright brothers. Wright brothers who are responsible for getting us to all of our fun locations of pleasure that we have been to and that we're going to go to in a plane. So they are responsible, that these people, and they illustrated so greatly task conflict and the benefits of task conflicts. And so when you hear their story, or even the siblings in their family that report like how they discuss with each other, they were the masters of passionately discussing the problems of a plane and all of the things. And I love that. I love that people looked at them and said, you could never imagine. I mean, they would yell, they would be so intense, but they weren't mad. And then they would go to the local restaurant and have dinner together or do whatever together. And they'd be like, what? And they would end that task. The task was, we want to create a plane that flies. And they argued and argued and argued and discussed, but they continually, I mean, look where we are today. Aren't you glad? But they illustrated that they didn't take that into the relationship. What if they all took it personally? I was like, my brother hates me. Yeah. And my brother thinks this about me because he disagreed with my idea. He's belittling me. He's degrading me. And I think about, we do that so often in our teams, you know? We want more cheerleaders on our teams than we want people who are willing to disagree with us and say, I don't know. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And so it was just a really cool expression of like, this is what we're trying to do. We want to be like the Wright brothers. We want to be able to communicate with each other, and maybe it has to get a little hot and intense, but not mad. Yeah. Just because we get hot and intense doesn't mean that I don't like you, Stacy. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I've grown a lot from this conversation. Yeah. I appreciate that.
Even on and off screen, guys. We're working.
This is a work in progress. we are working through it. Yes.
And I think it's important to note that next week we're going to talk about how you do this better. Yeah. And not that we are experts on this in the least, but I think there's little tips that we can stop this from becoming a relationship issue, because that's what the enemy, that's what, like, in our purpose in our life, it wants us to stop and make this all about us, when it's really about a bigger goal. It's about our calling. It's about what we're called to do. And we have so much good things, to say and to do. And we each have experiences that this all comes from, that if we're not willing to get it out in a healthy way.
And listen,
disagree a little bit, throw ideas off of each other.
We're never going to grow.
Never going to grow.
Yeah.
We have to. We have to be able to change.
Yeah. So we're giving this to you in chunks because we know this is a hard one. Well, I know it's a hard one. It's a hard one for me. So this week, just think about that first part. Let's think about conflict as a healthy thing. Think about conflict as a sign of caring. At least when you do it in relationship. I think that's really key. So go have a good, healthy fight with someone this week, right?
Or at least get ready to. Maybe you need to wait till next week to learn how to.
Yeah, good point.
At least think about the conflict that maybe you need to share, and you need to give a little bit of your advice and maybe not agree 100% with, and engage in task-oriented conflict this week, okay? Because we love you.